Hello, I'm Pat Scanlon. I'm a professor in the School of Communication, and I'm a writing coach for the Executive MBA program. Um, what that means primarily is you'll be sending me papers and as attachments to emails, and then I comment on them, give you some help. I'm not an editor. I'm not a proofreader. I'm here to teach. So primarily, what that'll mean is I'll be uh, putting commentary in your papers and sometimes doing some editing and some rewriting as examples of what I think you might have to work on. And I can get into, excuse me, a kind of a loop. We can do multiple iterations. And I'm going to say a little bit more later on about exactly how the mechanics of how that's going to work. But what I'm going to talk about just briefly here in this presentation is the kinds of things that I do and the sorts of things that I focus on in working with you as a coach. And those are primarily three things. I'm looking at writing being effective. That means that the reader gets out of it what you want them to get out of it, that it's concise, you don't waste a lot of words. You're going to be writing, some of the things you'll write could be quite lengthy and you're going to want to trim them down to make them manageable. So that's part of it. Concise doesn't mean necessarily fewer words, but it means no wasted words. And then there's also the readable part. Primarily, for the purposes of what we're going to be doing, that has to do with how you format and organize the papers. And I'm going to give you some examples and some illustrations and guidance on how best to do that to make these papers easy for people to read, easy to navigate. So part of what I want to get at is developing some good writing habits. One of those has to do with clarity of expression. So here's a sentence that somebody wrote. It was a business student. Multitasking is our strategic imperative at this point in time. It isn't meaningless, but it can mean lots of different things, primarily just because it uses a lot of phrases that are ambiguous. They have multiple potential meanings, and it's got some other problems as well. When we're clear in our expression, people can grasp our intended meaning immediately without doing a lot of brain work. This sentence involves a few things. It's got the term multitasking. It's kind of a cliche. It's gotten used to death. We think of it as meaning a variety of things, usually good. And then there is the strategic imperative. I called this business speak. I didn't mean that as an insult, but it was a kind of a strategic imperative was sort of a buzzword for a while. And then finally, there's this at this point in time. That means now. That means right now. It could even go without saying. If we want something to be important to us, that's what I think a strategic imperative is, then obviously it's right now. So those are some wasted words. Clarity of expression typically can, like I said, we want something that people can understand right away. So we want to do that with simple sentences. Here's one interpretation of what I think that person meant to say. We must do many things at once. I think the strategic imperative usually just means this is something we have to do. And multitasking is supposed to mean we can do a lot of things at the same time. Just as an aside, that turns out not to be such great advice anymore. A lot of good research has shown that, in fact, we don't do well if we try to do too many things at the same time. We're actually better at unitasking. So here's another way of saying the same thing. We have to do many things at once. What I'm doing every time I rewrite this sentence is I'm trying to get closer to something I'm comfortable saying out loud. And this is going to be one of my principal forms of guidance for you, is when you're getting into some writing that's starting to sound pretty unnatural, read it out loud and see if it sounds like something you're comfortable saying out loud. These two sentences I've already written are pretty close to what I would use, but still, they're not really that close to the way I talk. We have to do a lot of things at the same time. Now, that's more words, they're all short words, but it's closer to natural speech for me. And although in what you write, in the work that you do, a lot of what you write is not going to be natural. That is, it's going to be theoretical. You're going to use terminology that is not conversational. It's that sort of thing we talk, the way we talk every day. Still, it can be couched in sentences that are more like natural speech. A lot of the editing, excuse me, a lot of the guidance that I'll give you is based on this simple idea: clarity of expression, sentences that sound like natural speech. Okay, now on to the trimming the fat, getting to the concise part, the second of the third things that I focus on in your papers. This is from a cartoon. As regards the consumption of foodstuffs, I utilized a multi-tined tool to process a starch resource. Dilbert, you might know, is a cartoon that makes fun of the way people speak in offices. And a lot of that speech tends to be puffed up, uses a lot of jargon, and uses a lot of complicated words to say something simple. And this one is, I ate a potato with a fork. And there's a simple way to get to that idea. First of all, is to figure out what it is that you want to say. Excuse me. What exactly is it? In this case, I just want to back up. The consumption of foodstuffs is it's a simple kind of clearing your throat way of getting at the point. You're saying something about eating. You use this fork, and processing a starch resource, again, is just a highfalutin way of saying eating a potato. So the way that's, there's a simple way to get at sentences that you really want to write that are trim and that don't waste any words and it gets directly to the point. That is to start with a subject in the place at the beginning, an actor in the beginning in the place of the subject. That's I in this case. And then use a strong verb. In this case, it's ate. This is really a simple way to get at concise writing. Figure out who the actor is, put the actor in the beginning of the sentence in the place of the subject, and then follow that with a strong verb. Strong verbs usually express action, and they do it in a way that is immediately understandable. I ate is something nobody has to explain in order to understand. So when I'm looking at your papers, when I'm editing them, at least parts of them, again, I don't edit entire papers, to give illustrations of what I want to guide you to do. Often I will bring this up to say, if you have a very long, tangled sentence, I'll ask, what is the actor here? What is the real subject of the sentence? Let's get that at the beginning. See if we've got a strong verb, and then come up with a clear, concise sentence. And that's what that one's about. The last thing I'll be doing is helping you with these constructing reader-centered papers, that are organized and formatted in a way that help readers read them. And this is going to involve a couple of things. One is writing powerful introductions. And again, I should back up a little bit. I'm really talking here about papers of some length. This works for short papers as well, but I'm really going to be talking here about papers and the kinds of things you'll often be writing. They can be anywhere from 5 to 10 pages or longer. When you get into those kinds of lengths, you're going to want to do a couple of things to help readers navigate the paper, to move easily through them. And there are a couple of ways to do that. One is to write good introductions that give people a good overview. And then also to format the paper, and that means in two ways: using paragraphs. Sometimes people forget to do that, each focused on a clear topic. And then also to use headings and sometimes subheadings. These tag the paper and they help the the readers move through them easily. So the introduction should provide a comprehensive overview and introduce the content of the document. You want to do that in a way that gives the reader a kind of a preview of the organization of that document. I'm going to use examples here. So this is a paragraph introduction for a relatively short paper, and it was written by an executive MBA student a number of years ago. And what she was doing was writing about teamwork, and the paper followed it was a kind of an overview of how the team coalesced and how it got together. But what I like about this introduction is that it gives us a broad overview of a topic. That's in the first sentence. The dynamics of organizations today are rapidly changing. That's a broad statement. Then gets down to something narrower and more specific to what she's going to be writing about. To be competitive in today's global economy, organizations must be flexible, diverse, and include networks. Additionally, new organizations have created an evolution of cross-functional teams. As a result, companies are challenged with the transition to this new organization, how to effectively incorporate teams into their existing environment. So she's gone from a broad overview to a more specific statement about companies, and then now to the specific topic of this paper. A specific topic that she wants to write about. In an effort to address these needs, EMBA programs like the program at RIT are incorporating team development in their program. So we've gone from a broad overview to a more specific comment about businesses to an extremely specific statement about education in the EMBA program at RIT. And then finally, a sentence. Now that we've been grounded in the topic, now the final sentence that tells us specifically what the paper will be about. The objective of this paper is to explore some of the dynamics of team development as it relates to executive MBA study group at RIT. So this paper wasn't very long. I think it was just a couple of pages, so it didn't need a whole lot of overview of what the topics were going to be about in the rest of the paper. What it does really successfully is tell us, here's a topic I want to write about, a very general idea, and then getting more and more specific until finally it tells us specifically what we're going to be reading about. So it's a good model, especially for shorter papers. So when you're writing introductions, the way that I like to think of them is asking yourself a few questions. Where have we been? Where are we now? And where are we going? So where have we been is the context. Where are we now is the subject that we're about to write about or that you're going to learn about, that is speaking to the reader. And then finally, where are we going? What is the rest of the paper going to be about? So you're giving a kind of a roadmap for the rest of the paper. And what that does is it makes readers feel very comfortable. They know what's coming. Not only that, they can go back to these intros if the paper's long and remind themselves of what it is that they're supposed to be seeing. All right, so here's an introduction to a much longer paper. This was a case, kinds of things that you do a lot of in this program. This is a case from some years ago. So in the introduction, this is an introduction for a paper that was probably, 7 to 10 pages long. And the author starts out by giving us a very broad background, and this is that answers that question, where have we been? Dell's business model is selling customized desktop computers directly via mail to savvy customers. I'm sorry, let me start over again. Dell's business model of selling customized desktop computers directly via mail to savvy customers enabled the firm to grow revenue from $6 million in '85 to more than $2 billion in '92. You can see this is a little dated. Despite the success with desktops, Dell has struggled in the rapidly growing portable PC market. All right, so there's the history, there's the quick context. That answers the question, where have we been? Now, where are we right now? The case, Product Development at Dell Computer Corporation, describes Dell's approach to portable computer product development and outlines a critical decision point on battery choices for Dell's new line of portable computers. Here's where we are now. This was the specific case, and that's a very concise one-sentence overview of a long history. And then finally, where are we going next? And this is the overview of the paper itself. In this paper, I will describe a critique Dell's application of the innovation diamond, outline a process that I would use to reach a decision on battery choice, and recommend a way forward. So here's what I liked so much about this paper and the reason I used it as a model. What the author did was give that good background, bring us specifically to the present in the case that we're interested in, and then overviews the paper in its 3 parts. So that paper will first describe and critique Dell's application of this thing called the innovation diamond. That was some of the theory that the author was using. That's the first part of the paper. Outline a process I'd use to reach a decision on a battery choice. That's the second part. And then recommend a way forward. That's the third. So this is a really good model for the last sentence in introduction to a paper. It tells us precisely what's coming up. Also, let me bring up one other thing. It uses I. In this paper, I. There's been something of a revolution in academic writing only in the last couple of years, really, and that is to push people more toward writing in a personal style. That doesn't mean to be completely informal, but rather than using some kind of labored objective voice, referring to yourself in the third person, that sort of thing. The best thing to do and the most economically, the way to write economically to do this is to use I, or when you're working as a team, we. Then you have a good agent, a good actor to put at the beginning of your sentences. So I recommend this strongly. And when I'm looking at your papers, and sometimes when I'm doing a little editing as example, I will sometimes revise something that you've written to use that kind of format to show how it makes for clear, more direct, and usually much more concise writing. So this is a very good introduction for a longer paper. So what that introduction does is it forecasts the content and the organization of the entire paper. And here is a way of, I put this into a little bit more of a schematic to show exactly what happened here with that last sentence, with those 3 different sections of the paper. All right. So now, once you've done that kind of thing and you've got a good introduction, you can use headings and subheadings to guide your reader through the document. Sometimes I actually will, especially in much longer papers, recommend that people actually include those headings in the introduction itself. But it's not necessary as long as they've got a good idea of what's coming. So this is a version, this is the paper that was, and what I've done is I've taken out a lot of the text. I've just left in the introduction, and then the introduction to the first section of the paper, and then with the headings and then the subheadings. So I want to go over a little bit of this design. So the heading for the first major section was Dell's application of the innovation diamond. That's in the introduction as being the first part. And there's the text. So I'm not going to read all of this. I'm going to leave that to you. But that paragraph under that first major heading, Dell's application of the innovation diamond, is itself modeled on the introductory paragraph. What it does is it gives an overview of what's going to be in the section, and it breaks down its 4 subsections, and the author even numbered them, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then below that paragraph are the subheadings that organize the rest of that section. Again, I've taken all the text out just to make this a clearer view of the skeleton of the paper and how it worked together to organize the ideas. So there are the subheadings that are organized exactly in the order they're introduced. And then there's the next major section, decision-making process, battery choice, and then finally the recommendation. Those are the major headings, and I think especially under that section, decision-making process, I believe there were subheadings under that too, but again, I've eliminated all the text. I think that this is it's just an excellent example of how to organize and format a very long paper for readability. So those are the 3 things that I focus on when I look at your papers. I look at, first of all, whether or not you are writing effectively, that is, that the reader is getting out what I believe you're trying to say. Sometimes I'll actually sort of speak back to you in my comments and say, here's what I think you were saying. Is that right? Is that really what you meant? So I'll work on that part. This caveat is necessary. I've been doing this for a long time. As long as there's been an EMBA program, I've been working as a writing coach. So I've picked up, just by osmosis, I suppose, a lot of business ideas, let's put it that way, and some theory. However, I am not a content expert and I cannot pretend to be one, so I'll never do that. I'm only here to talk about the writing, but once in a while I might say, I think this is what you were doing in this section. Is that right? And then and that way we can, sometimes with some dialogue back and forth with the paper, arrive at what it was you were really trying to say. So the way that this works is when you have a paper in any form of draft, you send it to me as an attachment to an email. I will get it back to you with my comments, and then you are perfectly welcome to send it back to me again. So what I ask you to do is to give me at least 48 hours before a deadline. So in other words, please don't send me a paper when it's due the next day. If enough of you do that to me, it really jams things up. And I may not be able to spend as much time on those as I'd like if I'm looking at a lot of them under a very short deadline. So as a rule of thumb. Give me some time, 48 hours at a minimum. So that's all you need to do. And it can be in any form. It can be very rough, or it could be is what you're thinking of is nearly done. What I'll do is I'll provide advice on very early drafts. So if you have something that's just some sketch notes, I'll get back and I'll give you some ideas. Sometimes I've had people send me what amounts to a very rough outline, and I'll get back to them with how I think they ought to organize the paper. So that's one thing that I'll do. Mostly what I do is that second bullet. I review and critique your papers. So I give written comments. I use Word comment. So I embed comments inside the paper. And then I write some other notes, some general commentary. And I do that within 48 hours tops. So the way that I do this is a priority for me. So when you send me a paper, I put it on the desktop of my laptop, and so that I don't lose track of them, and I get them back always within 48 hours, usually faster. You can ask around. I think people will confirm that I do that. If there's ever a time when you've sent me something and it's gone beyond 48 hours, you can hear from me, something's happened, I somehow misplaced it. Don't be shy about sending me a reminder. I'll get right on it. And that does happen. It doesn't happen very often, but I'm also teaching other classes. I have a lot of other things going on. So I can misplace something. It's rare, but don't be shy about letting me know. Okay, that's it. That's how this works. I am always available. You can send me things and then resend them. Let me say one final thing. I'm not part of grading for this course. I don't suggest anything like that to anybody. Faculty don't come to me and ask me those kinds of questions. It really doesn't work that way. I'm only here to help you. That's really it. It's a rare kind of position for a teacher to be in. I don't grade you. I'm here to help you be better writers and to write better papers for the EMBA program specifically. So, take advantage of that. Not everybody does. I know that this is not a simple undertaking. I know that people, this takes a lot of work. And so you should take advantage of me because I am here to help you. So good luck, and I'll be seeing you online.